In this psychiatric profile, I'm going to be looking at Christopher Watts. Chris Watts. He was born May 16, 1985, and is currently serving 5 life sentences in prison for the murder of his family and an additional 84 more years for related offences such as interfering with a deceased body. Known as the family killer, the story of Chris Watts is quite an interesting one from a psychological point of view. He had no prior criminal history. He was liked by many people. He was seen as quite an unassuming and typical middle-class family man. And he was seemingly, at least from the outside, a loving and devoted husband to his wife and 2 children. So what happened? Did he snap? Did he have some form of psychotic breakdown? Did he hide a psychopathic side of himself for many years? Or is there some other explanation for the horrendous and violent crime that he committed? As with all my profiling videos, this is not a diagnostic assessment. I do not know Chris Watts. I've never met him or any of his family or inner circle. So the content of this psychiatric analysis is merely speculation based on the experience that I have as a clinical psychologist and with the forensic experience I also have. Look, I'm going to just try and conclude what is the best explanation based on the facts that I have heavily researched and what seems like a valid conclusion under the circumstances that you are about to hear. Now, before I continue, I want to warn viewers that this next section is particularly confronting. There's parts of Chris Watts' story that are very hard to hear. And whilst I try to compile this with consideration and care, nonetheless, there are disturbing elements to this that some people might find distressing. However, I find what I'm going to present is important to the understanding of this case and to the extent of the crime, the unexpected plunge into deviancy and violence that Chris apparently took. So continue from here with discretion and caution, and maybe consider stopping the video now if you feel this may be too confronting for you. Chris Watts did the unthinkable when he strangled his beautiful wife Shanann in the early hours of August 13th, 2018. We now know that his young daughters, Bella age 4 and Celeste or Cece age 3, heard some commotion and walked into the room as their father was wrapping their mother's body in the bed sheets after he had killed her. He then put the girls alive into the back seat of his vehicle and put the mother, still wrapped in the bed sheets that he'd wrapped her in, at their feet, and then drove for about an hour to his workplace where he would dispose of the body. He dumped Shanann into a shallow grave in a clearing not far from where he parked his car, and he took his 2 little girls one by one and smothered them. He killed Cece first, and then he returned for Bella. Chris later said that Bella resisted and was heard to call out, "Daddy, no," as he continued to smother her. Bella had wounds on her body that demonstrated that she did put up a fight, unlike Cece. More disturbingly, he then took each child to the top of 2 separate oil cylinders at his workplace and discarded their bodies through small 8-inch gap in the roof of the tank. I won't even comment further on the details of this other than to say, even in death, he disrespected their little bodies and ensured that 3 of his family members were discarded in different areas, ensuring they were not even together in death. It should be mentioned that Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant at the time of her killing, and their 3rd child was, we now know, going to be a little boy called Niko. There are some more unbelievingly graphic details that have emerged about what happened at the worksite, but I see no benefit in going into that further here. Suffice to say, the nature of the crime was extremely violent and doesn't seem to fit the profile of who Chris Watts was prior to the crime. So let's start by putting together a bit of a timeline, because it's really the weeks preceding the killing that things started to change. And it's what happened in those preceding weeks that I propose brought out who Chris Watts really was, always was, his true evil self that had been concealed largely because his life had been self-serving and convenient so far. But as soon as Shanann and the girls became an inconvenience, an obstacle to him, his true colours came through. It's important to note that there are some background variables here too, primarily a first bankruptcy that was filed in 2015 and a strained relationship between Shanann and Chris's parents. However, these seem to be ongoing problems and not new or impacting the current situation or current timeline that we're about to discuss, although financial problems and strained relationships are always important factors to mention in forensic analysis. So let's take a little look at the timeline now. Shanann met Chris when he sent her a friend request on social media platform and she accepted. She had stated that she was in a bad place when he reached out to her and she had never expected to have found someone so right for her. She said Chris changed her life in the most wonderful way and she would frequently, almost daily, post testimonials and little posts confessing her love for him. That continued throughout their relationship from the time she met him to their marriage in 2012, and they moved into their dream home in 2013, and up until a couple of weeks before her death in 2018, Shanann was still professing her love for this man. Shanann seemed delighted to have learned of her third pregnancy, and she announced this on June 11th, 2018, only 2 months before Chris would kill her. And she filmed this too. In the video, Chris seems genuinely happy to learn of the pregnancy. Let's take a look.
We did it again. I like that shirt. Really?
Really?
That's awesome. So pink means...
That's just the test.
I know. It just says the pink is going to be girls.
I don't know. Just the test.
That's awesome.
So that video you've just seen, 2 months before the murder, is really where I think we need to focus on as far as relevant timelines go, because around that exact same time, Chris was striking up a relationship with a colleague from his work by the name of Nichol Kessinger. Their new relationship moved swiftly and it appears Chris grew relatively obsessed with Nichol in many ways. And this relationship with Nichol is critical to the events that would follow. So a couple of days after the news that baby 3, little Niko, was coming along, Shanann sent Chris a video of Bella singing a song for her daddy.
My daddy is a hero. He helps me grow up strong. He helped me not go to. He reads me books. He ties my shoes. And you're a hero. Blue and blue. My daddy, I love you. Oh,
The very next day after receiving that video, we now know Chris entered Nichol Kessinger's phone number into his mobile phone. He also downloaded an app that would hide content and videos to keep this secret from his wife. Now remember, we are talking about 4 days here. Chris learned of baby number 3 on the 11th. He received the message from Bella on the 14th, and that same day, he officially started a secret relationship with his colleague, Nichol. At this point, we believe Nichol may be unaware that Chris was married and had 2 children, and 1 on the way. But it was only the following week or so that Chris revealed this to her, somewhere around the 17th of June. On the 19th of June, Shanann had an ultrasound, and Chris was present. Shanann had noticed that Chris was becoming more withdrawn, more distant, and even though he attended, Shanann stated that she tried to hold his hand and he really didn't respond. Nevertheless, Shanann posted on Facebook saying that her husband was the best dad the girls could ever hope for. Over the next week or so, Shanann was texting her best friend saying Chris was acting very distant and she was unsure what was going on. Her best friend was trying to reassure her and assumed it was just the usual stress of learning about a new baby, but thought it would settle and that Chris would return to the doting father and husband that he had always been in the past. However, Chris's avoidance and withdrawal continued, and on June 27, Shanann took the girls, Bella and Cece, for a 5-week vacation to her parents' house in North Carolina, whilst Chris stayed at home to continue working. During those 5 weeks, Shanann was missing Chris, and she was texting and calling him frequently. Chris, however, was off with his mistress for much of that time and promising Nichol he was separating from Shanann and assuring Nichol that they would be together soon. As a side note, Nichol later stated she was unaware of Shanann being pregnant until after the murder. But given how much Shanann posted on social media, that's really hard to believe. I also have some strong opinions on Nichol's knowledge of other events and perhaps her persuasive and controlling influence on Chris's ultimate actions, but I'll leave that for another time, another video, and continue to just profile Chris Watts in this video. But it is important for me to say that Nichol may have been more instrumental in all of this than perhaps we realise. Anyway, Shanann was away and Chris and Nichol are turning up the heat on their relationship. Again, some graphic content around what happened here, but unnecessary for the purpose of this video. We know that Nichol went to Shanann and Chris's home for the first time on July 4th, but Nichol denies any physical intimacy. Again, I don't believe her testimony here for various reasons, but let's just say it is documented and it's clear that their relationship did become intimate while Shanann was away at her parents' house. And we now know that Chris and Nichol went away on trips. They went on various dates together. There were semi-nude photos of Nichol retrieved from Chris's secret app on July 18th. On July 28th, 2018, Chris and Nichol go and visit the Great Sand Dunes National Park together, and they spend the night there at a nearby campground. 2 days later, Chris sends Nichol a love letter and then left town to join his family in North Carolina on their summer vacation. All his activities with Nichol obviously were unknown to Shanann at this time. Texts from Shanann to her best friend even state that she doesn't believe Chris would ever cheat on her and that she doesn't think that he's that kind of guy. This tells me that Shanann really had no idea who she was married to, and that Chris had no previous reason to betray or hurt Shanann. She must have been serving some kind of purpose for him up until this point, but now she was becoming a hindrance, interfering with his ability to pursue his relationship with Nichol. And the girls and unborn Niko must also have been considered as inconveniences to him at this point, especially when we now know that Nichol had told Chris that she was the one that wanted to experience all these firsts with him. And now, given he already had a family, it was impossible for her to ever have that with him. On July 31st, Chris is reunited with his wife Shanann for the final week of their vacation at Shanann's parents' place. There were recovered text messages and documents of these days that show us that the interactions between the two were becoming disharmonious, and some very frustrated texts directed at Chris's parents were retrieved from Shanann's phone. This was evidence of an ongoing but potentially increasing tension between them and the in-laws. On August 4th, now only 9 days before her death, Shanann sent some angry messages to Chris, accusing his parents of almost killing Cece after they exposed her to nuts which she was allergic to. In that same angry text, Shanann was accusing Chris of not standing up to his parents, and she told him that the girls were her world, that they meant everything to her, and how much she adores them. She also calls Chris out on his distancing and this emerging withdrawal that she's now becoming aware of. And she accuses him of really showing no interest or concern about her third pregnancy. Later that same day, Shanann seems to have had a confrontation with the in-laws. And as a result, Chris's parents did not attend Cece's birthday that summer. The texts are quite volatile and fraught with anger and hurt, even a bit nasty. Shanann is also texting her friend that she doesn't want Chris's parents to see the kids anymore. So clearly things are really escalating here between Shanann, Chris and the in-laws. And Chris's response in all of this seems really avoidant and impotent in many ways. Also on August 4th, whilst Chris was still away, detectives later retrieved internet searches for wedding dresses from Nicole's phone. So Nicole is obviously expecting bigger things from Chris through this time too. On August 7th, now only 6 days before her death, Shanann and Chris return home. Shanann confides with her best friend about Chris, telling her friend that Chris had said he doesn't want the third baby. She told her friend that Chris hadn't even come close to her or touched her all week, and for the first time, Shanann appears to suspect that Chris might be seeing another woman. On August 9th, Shanann decides to cancel the gender reveal party that they had booked the following week due to Chris's apathy about the news of the third baby. Shanann then leaves for a business trip due to return home on August 13th, which is the day she will be killed. She tells her best friend that Chris and her had a good chat the night before she left. This seemed positive, but at least to Shanann. But my thoughts are that Chris was just telling Shanann what she wanted to hear because he was about to have the next few days at home and potentially opportunities to be with Nicole. We now know that Chris did indeed spend some time with Nicole while Shanann was away, taking her to a sports bar on August the 11th and using his own credit card to buy the meal. Shanann later found that purchase, and I think that's where she really knew something was going on. I believe this was the moment Shanann came to this place of acceptance that her husband probably was cheating, and she decided to confront him when she got home. On August 13th at 1:48 a.m, surveillance cameras show Shanann arriving home from her trip. A few hours later, she would be dead. We now know in the early hours of that morning, Chris and Shanann got into an argument, presumably over Shanann confronting Chris about the cheating. Then we know that Chris strangled his wife and then later smothered his daughters and dumped their bodies at the worksite. He then went on to work that day as if nothing had happened. His work colleagues later stated that apart from Chris parking his truck in a slightly different spot, nothing was really unusual about his mannerisms or behaviour. Now this is where I find Chris's behaviour very revealing. Imagine having just killed your whole family and then being able to continue on with your working day, knowing their bodies are only meters away. His little girls were disposed of in separate cylinders, both containing oil and water. Shanann's best friend arrived later that morning to collect Shanann for an appointment, but noticed that Shanann's car was still there, her shoes were still at the front door, there were no signs of the girls or Shanann, and her friend knew Shanann enough to be concerned and to alert the police. And I don't think Chris expected the police to be involved so soon. Chris rushed back to his house when he was contacted and told his family was missing, and his behaviour is really fascinating here. He acts so calm and collected. He doesn't look like he is worried and concerned. He is narcissistic enough to think he could get away with this. Facial micro-expressions have revealed that during interviews with the press the next day, Chris displays signs of pleasure. I also see contempt and, true to narcissistic form, the expressions suggest to me he actually thinks he is smarter than them all and that he's going to get away with this. The only time I saw his demeanour change visibly was when, in that initial call out from the police on the 13th of August, the neighbour advises the police that he has a surveillance camera and it picks up the area outside Chris's home. They all go in to have a look at the footage that has been released to the public now. So we can now watch this as Chris realises for the first time that his lie is about to fall apart. He told the police that Shanann and the girls were still in the home when he left for work at 5 a.m. Mind you, he never left for work that early before, so that in itself was unusual behaviour, and even the neighbour notices this and reports that to the police. But the neighbour's camera shows Chris walking back and forth to his car several times, and in one instance you can see him carrying something. But the camera proves no one else entered or left the house that day. Chris starts to become really nervous at this point, but he maintains his lie.
Yeah, we can pick up cars coming this way. I get anything coming this way making a turn. So, and usually at night I pick up the cars pulling a U-turn. So, unless they pulled right here, but I would have caught her walking out.
On August 15th, only 2 days after the murder, right before midnight, Chris was arrested on suspicion of murder following a failed polygraph and a growing body of incriminating evidence, including his mistress Nicole, who also presented at the police department and revealed her relationship with him. In those 2 days following the callous and violent murder of his whole family, Chris shows very clear signs of narcissism. Although having no criminal history and no reported domestic violence or other deviancy in his past, he doesn't even shed a single tear throughout all this time. Nothing.
And you have not shed one tear in 2 days that you've been here.
No.
Not one. And help me understand that, because I don't get it. These are your baby girls. And you have not shed one tear over them not being around. Chris, I lose my 4-year-old in the store for 10 seconds and I start to go panic. Panic. I have not seen any of that from you at all. Help me understand that.
I love those girls. I would never do any just because I haven't shed a tear. Like, you get
no, that's weird. Is that weird?
He later shed no tears in court either, listening to the victim impact statements of both his and Shanann's family. This demonstrates simply no guilt, no remorse at all for his callous actions. He thought he could outsmart everyone and get away with this. When he was being interrogated at the police station and it became clear to him that they had more information than he realised, he even tried to blame Shanann, his dead wife, who clearly idolised her children, for the murder.
I don't want to protect her. What? I don't want to protect her. You don't want to protect her? I don't know what else to say. What happened? Huh? She hurt him? Yeah. And then I was telling her. Well, no, I was telling her. You're her. Did they leave after that for a long time? So she started hurting the kids. Paper. Probably you guys want to know. Or choking. No. I didn't hear anything. When I was downstairs, they came back up and they were calling.
Even in separating his family after their deaths is telling to me. It speaks of a gross lack of concern, a lack of regret, a final insult to those who stood in the way of his new life with his mistress. In sentencing, the judge referred to this crime as senseless and said that in all his years as a judge, this was the most inhumane and vicious crime he has ever handled out of thousands of cases that he's seen. So what would my diagnosis be? Remembering, this is speculative only. Some have said Chris must have had a psychotic breakdown, but there is no evidence of this. A psychotic breakdown assumes a break from reality. We would typically see disorientation, we'd see word salad, non-linear thought form and thought processes. And whilst you could argue that killing your whole family is irrational, this was also very calculated, it was planned, and it was done with a sense of understanding and knowledge of what he was doing. Might even do another video, because through my research for this video, I've learned many things about Chris and Nicole in the weeks before the murder. And some of these things suggest to me that Chris was planning to kill Shanann for at least a week before he did so. But my point here is that there is clear evidence of forethought and calculation that we don't really see with psychotic breakdowns or with rage even. Chris had thought this out to some extent, and after the killing, he was still planning, he was still manipulating. This was evidenced by Chris calling Bella's school the very same day and telling them that she was going to be unenrolled. He also contacted a real estate agent about selling his house. Irrational, perhaps, but not the actions of someone who is detached from reality and can't think, or who is acting on impulse and without understanding of the consequence of their actions. So no, this was not a psychotic breakdown. In clinical terms, we would call this a psychotic episode. Lay people might call it a mental breakdown or insanity, but a psychotic episode might include delusions, hallucinations, talking incoherently, or being agitated. The person with the condition usually isn't aware of his or her behavior, and Chris was very aware, and therefore he was not having a breakdown of any kind. I would say Chris is much more likely to be someone who the layperson might refer to as a narcissistic sociopath. In clinical terms, this would mean Chris presents with what we call cluster B personality traits. Specifically, in Chris's case, this would be narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder. The cause of these personality types is really unknown, but likely involves a combination of both genetic and environmental factors. I don't have enough information on Chris's early childhood here to speculate further. But from what I can see and what I've researched, there doesn't seem to be anything significantly abnormal or traumatic there. So symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder include an excessive need for admiration, which Shanann had always given Chris. If you think about all her public displays of praise and attention and all her posts on social media about how wonderful he was for years, then you can see how he was getting this from Shanann for a significant period of time. He also had a real disregard for others' feelings and an overinflated sense of self-entitlement. Those with antisocial personality disorder tend to lie, they tend to break laws, act impulsively, and have a lack of regard for their own safety or the safety of others. So antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder belong to the same cluster, cluster B, and in Chris's case, I think we see evidence of both. The reason we haven't seen that in his history before was likely because he was getting what he needed, either constant praise and attention or other needs he wanted were being met. I don't believe anything deeper actually existed. I don't think he ever really experienced compassion, love, or empathy in a way that you or I might experience it. It was merely self-serving and artificial, and as long as Chris was feeling like he was gaining something from it, then it was okay. The moment, and literally it was the moment that Chris felt that changed, we see his true identity emerge. And that's the scary thing living with psychopaths, is that they can maintain a very convincing facade if they need to. I don't really need to comment about whether I believe Chris could be rehabilitated or not, because he will never leave prison alive. Interestingly though, Chris would probably disagree, because last year in 2020, he had a phone call trying to set up an appointment with an attorney and telling them that 2 years was enough penance for his sins and that he should now be released from prison to fulfill God's plan for his life. He actually says in that call that God wouldn't put him in jail and through all this trouble without a door of hope. Chris, God didn't put you there. When you killed your wife and your 3 children, you signed that deal yourself. See, that itself tells me this guy is probably not capable of rehabilitation, because his psychopathic narcissism is so ingrained. It's immutable. And you don't have to be a psychiatrist or forensic psychologist to conclude that someone capable of a crime of that magnitude is unlikely to change. Chris is certainly where Chris belongs. I usually end my videos with my standard outro, but in this case, I wanted to end this video with a tribute to Shanann, to Bella, to Cece and Niko. May their lives continue in a place much more beautiful than the life that they knew here. My thoughts are also with the family members who continue without the blessing of Shanann and her children each and every day. My love and thoughts are with them all.